What if Trotsky took power instead of Stalin? Today, we're going to explore this alternate path of history and see how different the 20th century might have been. Lenin is dead. His passing is mourned across the newly formed Soviet Union, but it is not unexpected. For years he had been weakened by strokes, and everyone knew the end was near. His death left one question: who would lead the party after him? In our timeline, it was Stalin, but what if Trotsky had been the one to take control? To understand this, we need to step back. Stalin did not simply appear out of nowhere and take the throne. He was a Bolshevik from the earliest days, a man who steadily rose through the ranks. By the time of Lenin's final years, Stalin was already in a key position: general secretary, a post personally granted by Lenin. Trotsky's story was different. He had once been a Menshevik, joining the Bolsheviks only in 1917 when it became clear they were winning. This difference mattered. For Trotsky to rise, Lenin would have needed to publicly and consistently endorse him, which in reality never happened. In fact, Trotsky was not especially well liked within the party. He was brilliant in his writing and as a military commander, but he was also sharp, arrogant, and uncompromising. Even other revolutionaries found him difficult. To imagine him taking power, something fundamental would need to change. Lenin would need to openly oppose Stalin and push Trotsky forward. There was one historical moment that came close: Lenin's so-called testament, a letter criticizing Stalin and suggesting he be removed. Its authenticity has been debated, but even if it was genuine, it was not enough to shift the balance of power. In this alternate timeline, however, let's imagine Lenin making his opposition to Stalin crystal clear, leaving Trotsky as the natural successor. Even with Lenin's backing, Trotsky would still need allies in the Soviet leadership. Between 1922 and 1924, Stalin skillfully built coalitions inside the Central Committee, while Trotsky often found himself isolated. He preferred writing, theorizing, and commanding armies to the small compromises of politics. But suppose Lenin's support tipped the scales enough to give him a chance. Trotsky's main strength was the Red Army. As its leader, he had overseen victory in the Russian Civil War. He defeated foreign intervention from the United States and Britain. He crushed uprisings like Kronstadt. He fought in Ukraine, the Baltics, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. His achievements were undeniable, but his methods were harsh. He endorsed the Red Terror, the wave of repression by the Cheka secret police. Executions, forced labor, exile, all were part of his approach. This is one reason many Bolsheviks distrusted him. Still, his military record made him a figure of authority, at least for a time. But Trotsky was not a politician in the same way Stalin was. Stalin built networks of loyalty. He knew when to make deals and when to step back. Trotsky was uncompromising, certain that his vision of socialism was correct. In our timeline, this rigidity isolated him. In the alternate scenario, his path to power would be narrow, but possible if Lenin's endorsement was strong enough. Let's say Trotsky does succeed. What kind of leader would he be? The first years of his rule would almost certainly be unstable. Trotsky was not afraid to use secret police and violence, just like Stalin. He would rely on coercion to keep order and rework the party from within. Yet there were key differences. Trotsky believed the party should not control every detail of economic life. He thought experts, even those from bourgeois backgrounds, could and should be used. During the Civil War, he had enlisted former Tsarist officers to train the Red Army. In government, he would likely bring in economists, engineers, and specialists, allowing limited private trade and local enterprise to exist, much like Lenin's earlier new economic policy. Still, Trotsky was an ideologue. The Gulag system would exist under him. Prison camps and deportations had existed in Russia long before Stalin, and Trotsky would have continued this tradition. In fact, his zeal for ideological purity suggests he might have imprisoned even more opponents than Stalin, especially within the party itself. His Soviet Union would be fanatical, rigid, and unforgiving. What about the peasants? Here, too, Trotsky's policies would not look very different. The kulaks, wealthier peasants who hired labor, were seen as enemies of socialism. Trotsky was a strong supporter of crushing them. He criticized Stalin's methods, but not the goal. So in this alternate timeline, kulaks are still targeted, land is collectivized, and repression follows. The difference is that Trotsky rejected trade with capitalist nations. He would not have exported grain abroad, which was one of the causes of the Holodomor famine under Stalin. A famine still might occur, but likely not as severe. The true divergence between Trotsky and Stalin was foreign policy. Stalin believed in socialism in one country. Secure the Soviet Union first, then worry about spreading revolution. Trotsky believed in permanent revolution. Socialism could not survive in isolation, he argued. It had to expand. That belief would shape everything. Under Trotsky, the Soviet Union would take an aggressive stance abroad almost immediately. Neighboring states like Poland and Finland would become targets. If communist movements failed in those countries, Trotsky would not hesitate to use military force. Unlike Stalin, who often waited, Trotsky would strike early. This creates a dangerous alternate history. In the 1920s and 1930s, Europe was unstable. Revolutions did break out, but most failed because the wider population did not support them. If Trotsky pushed Soviet armies into Poland or Germany, the response would likely be swift. Britain, France, and even Germany, bitter enemies in World War I, might unite against the Soviet threat. Instead of World War II beginning with Hitler's invasion of Poland, we could see an earlier conflict sparked by Trotsky's aggressions. And unlike Stalin, who prepared defensively for an eventual attack, Trotsky would attack first. This could plunge Europe into war years earlier than in our timeline. Now, imagine how this plays out. Soviet troops pour into Eastern Europe. Western powers, already fearful of communism, rally together. Nazi Germany, instead of being the primary aggressor, becomes part of the anti-Soviet coalition. Fascism could be strengthened, even martyred, as nations see themselves uniting to stop the Red Menace. The ideological clarity of our World War II, democracy and communism against fascism, would be replaced with a murkier struggle. Such a war could drag on, with Europe divided, until new weapons shifted the balance. The atomic bomb, developed in the 1940s, might have been used against Soviet cities like Moscow or Leningrad. Trotsky's aggressive policies might lead to devastation far worse than what happened under Stalin, not just for the Soviet Union, but for Europe as a whole. Trotsky's reputation in exile helps explain why this alternate scenario fascinates so many. After losing the power struggle, he was expelled from the party, then the country. From abroad, he continued writing essays and books, fiercely criticizing Stalin. To many, this created the image of Trotsky as the lost alternative, the leader who might have saved socialism from tyranny. But the truth is more complicated. Trotsky had supported policies that were often just as ruthless as Stalin's. He justified the Red Terror. He believed in crushing political opponents. His criticisms of Stalin were less about morality and more about method. Again and again, Trotsky argued that the policies were correct, but that Stalin carried them out in the wrong way. In other words, Trotsky's alternative was rarely more humane, only different in emphasis.
What, then, would the Soviet Union look like under his leadership? Domestically, it would remain authoritarian. The Gulag system would exist. The kulaks would be punished. Ideological dissent would be silenced. Some differences would appear in the economy, where specialists might play a greater role, and limited private trade could survive longer. But the essential character of the state would be the same: rigid, repressive, and guided by ideology above all. The larger shift would come in foreign policy. Stalin was cautious, sometimes slow, but patient. Trotsky was impatient and aggressive. His call for permanent revolution meant conflict abroad was inevitable. Even if his early interventions failed, he would not stop.
His belief in the necessity of spreading socialism would push the Soviet Union into repeated wars. This leads to a disturbing possibility. Imagine the Soviet Union under Trotsky attacking Poland or Germany before Hitler's rise to power. The Western democracies, already deeply suspicious of communism, would not hesitate to join forces against him. Instead of a united front against fascism, the world could see a united front against socialism. Fascism might even gain sympathy as the lesser evil compared to Trotsky's relentless aggression. Such a war would devastate Europe. It might drag on for years, a bloody stalemate across Central Europe. Neither side would easily break the other. Eventually, the invention of nuclear weapons could end the conflict. Perhaps the bombs would fall on Moscow and Leningrad. Perhaps more Soviet cities would be targeted. The Soviet Union might collapse under the pressure, its revolution consumed by Trotsky's own uncompromising vision.
And if that happened, what would remain? Fascism might not be defeated so easily. By making himself the world's aggressor, Trotsky could inadvertently strengthen the very ideologies he despised. Fascism could survive longer, perhaps even expand further, because its enemies would have been divided. In trying to spread socialism across the globe, Trotsky could have doomed it. This is why Trotsky's myth remains powerful. His exile writings created the image of a brilliant revolutionary betrayed by Stalin. Writers like George Orwell shaped this myth further, portraying him as a symbol of hope in works such as Animal Farm. The exiled revolutionary, silenced but unbroken, became an icon for later generations of the left. Even movements far beyond the Soviet Union carried his influence, from the counterculture of the 1960s to the political debates that shaped modern conservatism. Yet history shows us a harsher truth. Trotsky was no savior waiting in the wings. He was as ruthless, as ideological, and as uncompromising as Stalin. His difference was not in kindness or moderation, but in the direction of his zeal. He sought endless revolution and endless conflict. Had he ruled, the 20th century might have been even bloodier. So, what do we learn from this? Alternate history often tempts us with what-ifs that promise better outcomes. But sometimes, the alternatives are no brighter than reality. Trotsky, as leader of the Soviet Union, is one of those cases. His rule might not have spared millions from tragedy. It might have created new tragedies of its own. What do you think? Would Trotsky's vision have saved the Soviet Union, or destroyed it even faster? Would the world have been spared the horrors of Stalin, or would it have faced new horrors under Trotsky? This has been What If Archives. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to subscribe and share your own ideas for future what-if scenarios in the comments. Your suggestions often shape what comes next.